who we met last night. Some of you met last night, who's the founder of Communities in Schools and a long-time advocate for children and youth across this country. And we're thrilled that he's joined us for the Policy Fellowship. And our own Terry Peterson, who's chair of the board of the After School Alliance, worked with Secretary Riley for a number of years, and has held various positions related to education and the development of young people and communities. So we're really going to be talking about the intersection of schools and community and the work that we're doing to improve educational opportunities for kids and families who need them the most. And you both have bios included in all of the materials, so I'm sure all of our fellows have read about both Terry and Bill. And to get us started today, rather than reading a bio to you, I wanted to ask them about their background and their experiences and what early in their careers or early in their lives were some pivotal experiences that might explain why they're in the positions that they're in today. So, Bill, Terry, somebody want to start on that one?
Hi, it's wonderful to be here. First of all, how many are familiar with communities and schools? Oh, okay. In conclusion, it's funny, but I didn't know you were going to ask that question, and I was asked in a recent interview. It was kind of muckety-muck people, and they took themselves very seriously. And they asked me how I got involved in education. And I said, the day I got kicked out of high school. And that really went over big. And they said, well then, what happened after that? I said, well, I eventually finished 3 freshman years of college, which totally qualifies me to talk here today. But I never made it. But I didn't know back then, they didn't know where I went to school about learning differently. And I got classified and got very angry and lashed out and got in a lot of trouble. And the impact of what I do today goes all the way back there because wherever I go, whatever I say, I always mention the fact that it's relationships that change people, not programs. And if somebody hadn't come in my neighborhood, it happened to be from a group called Young Life, and turned me on to living, I wouldn't have made it. In fact, very few of my friends made it to 30 without being dead or in jail. And it was this caring adult coming and giving me hope, along with another friend of mine that was on heroin at the time. And so this movement that I'm part of now started out very humbly. We moved into Harlem in 1960, and my education happened between 1960 and 71, working on the streets there. I had one gift, and it's still my only gift. Some people think, and that's hanging out. I'm still trying to get a freaking degree in it. Maybe Furman will give me a degree. It's a lost art.
It's a multidisciplinary.
It is. So just, again, I couldn't hang out. Nobody was out on the streets with the kids. And then Vinny, who had gotten off drugs, said, how can you say you love kids? Let him live in rooftops. So this priest, a wealthy church, gave us 2 tenement apartments. So I learned about community. For 5.5 years, I had 35 young people living with me at a time, and I didn't know how to build community, and it was extremely painful. I spoke at 12 funerals by the time I was 25 and got very, very angry because I couldn't understand how 40 blocks away were the wealthiest people, and I'm here talking at kids' funerals. So some of the things I do today, I learned differently, and it was on the streets. And I got into education, not because I knew anything about education. Really, in an 8th grade education, I had 2 freshman years at Pitt and 1 at New York University, so I was an authority in that, but not enough to run a school. But I wasn't allowed in schools back then. It was the 60s. And so we started our own school. It was not because I knew anything about education, but you can't tell you love a kid, get them on the straight and narrow, and then they have no nothing to do except sell drugs.
Mm-hmm.
So fortunately, it was the 60s. Things were heating up on the streets, so I backed into that. We created a little storefront school. I made the mistake of calling it a liberation school. It's not good for fundraising, so I don't do that, but it was kind of the intern.
Yes.
And over a couple beers one night, some of the Columbia students that volunteered for me said, change the name, maybe we get some money. So I said, what do wealthy people call their schools? And they said academies. I said, hell, we'll call it academy. And this was later written up by the Ford Foundation. It was about 8 weeks later, my colleagues and I were sitting in the first boardroom I'd ever been in, talking about this miracle we had in Harlem. And I said, all you do is change the name and they give you money. So it's a good fundraising technique. But that little school is what gave hope. And a GED was really, really important. Like, I mean, it was a real way out. So all these smart kids from Columbia and Princeton all were marching on this and that. And I said, well, why don't some of you teach? I know how to turn kids on to living. They have to get turned on to living before they get turned on to learning. That's another policy. I've fought for 40-some years in Washington just to get them to understand that. And it's so simple, but so that, and then those began to spread, and later we started communities and schools. But that's how, it's an unusual way to get into education.
Terry, what about your background and experience?
Almost the opposite starting point.
He was my parole officer.
Yes. I could have been then, but very ineffective. I was really good at school. I could listen to a lecture, remember everything, so I didn't have to do homework much, and became a teacher, science teacher, in first Brazil, and then in the first year of school desegregation in South Carolina. Totally apolitical. I knew nothing about community organizing, living, this was in the 60s, can you believe that? But that's, you know, I was very sheltered. But I ran into a problem in the school I was in. I had high school kids who couldn't read a word. And I started checking around and found out in this very poor rural school, 100% Title I. There was no programs to help kids with reading in school, after school. They were just using the money to run the whole school system, which is illegal. That really ticked me off. And so then I realized I had to have some allies to do something about it, and that was parents and teachers in my community and statewide. And basically, for then 10 years, I became a teacher and community organizer. Almost the same time you were doing that across the South. And got interested in federal programs. I didn't know what a policy was. I didn't know what a program was. I didn't know what a law was. I didn't know what funding was. But I had to learn it like you had to learn to run a school. And then once I saw that, I saw, aha, you know, I can organize myself to death complaining in one school about the misuse of money. But what if I actually could help change the law for a bunch of schools and kids and communities and make community participation part of the law, make the programs more targeted, make them more interesting. I wish I had known what I know now about quality after school programs. I'm blinking. Okay. I didn't know much about how do you make learning engaging, even though I was a chemistry teacher then for kids who were struggling at risk. And I wish I'd known, like I said, what I know now about quality after school and summer programs and building school community partnerships. But I didn't. So I plunged into this new space. I'm going to check with Bill. So I didn't really own a suit or wear a tie until I was about 35 and got somehow asked to interview for a job with a new governor called Dick Riley. And so I thought maybe I should have a suit and a tie. And some of you have seen me, you probably can't imagine me without a tie on. But I learned I have to kind of do that sometimes. But Bill, you probably didn't have a suit or tie either when you were in the storefront.
Nope.
So it sounds like, you know, your early experiences were formative in convincing you about the need for communities and schools
work together, and in some cases sort of blur the lines between communities and schools. And I'm wondering, how important do you think that is today, and why is it so critical and so important to have communities and schools on the same page working together?
Is there some conspiracy going there?
Yes.
Oh, he's got his back. I think I have to, part of the issue I've found over the years is we try to solve issues without understanding context. And what happened to me was I got a call, this was in the early 70s, to come testify in Washington, and I thought they had the wrong person. But I found out later they were looking for a white guy with long hair who had been in a riot, because it was the Kerner Commission studying the riots, and I guess I was the only one out there. So I got there and I didn't know how to testify. I mean, the only other time, to be frank, is I'd been in Washington when I'd been arrested. And I thought, this is really a cool country that you can, it was a mass arrest in '68. But it was there that came the vision of what we're doing, because somebody said, can you take what you were doing in the street academies and do a heart transplant and put it inside? But let me just take 1 minute on this, because I think it affects everything we're doing. I'm self-taught. I have to learn my own way. So one of the questions I asked the inquisitors was, I said, how many major changes in history have happened in 2, 3, or 4 years? And there was no answer. I said, then why are we supposed to bring change to history in 2, 3, or 4 years? Government says we have to do it in 2 to 4 years, and foundations tell us we have to do it in 3. And I said, our theory of change is ridiculous. Then I asked another question. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to ask the question, but I did. And so I said, I don't think we're going to solve this issue unless we understand how we got in this situation in the first place. And this I could talk an hour on this. I'm going to take literally 3 minutes, but it sets the context. I traced it back to right after World War II. And right after World War II, as you know, we had a major shift from the farms to the cities. And that was a major move. The GI Bill kicks in and the whole economy heats up. And then there was a great work called Man-Child in the Promised Land that talked about the migration from the Alabamas, Mississippis, etc., of African Americans moving to the north thinking it would be less racist, which they found there was no difference. And also they were structured out of the new economy because they didn't have the tools for the new economy. This keeps happening over and over. So they didn't find promise or land, and then the white flight, the little thing over to Levittown and the suburbs. Well, my theory was that we slowly pulled apart, not out of any evil intent, we pulled apart the safety net for children, which was the extended family and relationship with the faith community, were the mediating structures. And so the barn burns down. If it's a healthy community, build the barn. Later, Hillary writes a book, Takes a Village. And I said to her, there's no village. We lost the village. And my theory was that schools fell into the vacuum that was created by this breakdown in community. So in that testimony, I said, we're going to win or lose the future of America's schoolhouse door. But you're going to think it's an education issue. It's not a content issue, it's a form issue. I said, schools now more and more, and that was in the early 70s, it just got worse. Teachers are being asked to be mother, father, sister, brother, social worker, hall guard, everything but teachers. So if we don't understand what schools are, how much difference, so the need for them became much different than they were in rural America, or even the early parts of the Industrial Revolution. And you had community where the school was right there. So the simple idea we came up is, well, let's bring the community to the school, all the resources, free the teachers up to be teachers and the principal. People didn't take it serious. I didn't know they called them hearings because nobody's listening. And so it took 30 years more. They finally get it. The kids, they call it non-cognitive or something, but these kids come to school hungry, they're going through all kinds of pain and all that, and then we're saying, you teach. And that was my argument with the Secretary of Education during No Child Left Behind. There's parts of it I like it, but you haven't addressed the fact that not all kids go to school equally. So,
Terry?
What was the question again?
The importance of bringing the community and schools together.
Bill's history is really terrific, and I think all that is even more important now because, even up to 40, 50 years ago in much of America, particularly the South and the Midwest, you could get a reasonable job without a high school diploma. Almost all that's evaporated. You don't need a 4-year degree, but you probably need a high school diploma. You probably need some extra training, and you have to be able to keep on learning throughout your lifetime. For half the adults today, that is a really new concept. And so the only way you can do that is if you look at learning broadly. How do we use the whole community, both as a learning place, and how can we bring people into the school? How can we keep schools open? It makes absolutely zero sense. Schools close, most of them, at 3 o'clock. We're in an education era, and they're closed, sitting in a low-income neighborhood, sitting with labs. Even if they're underfunded, they have more equipment and know-how than most things in the community. And then there's community groups, community schools, Boys and Girls Clubs, Ys, 4-H saying, hey, I'd love to have some kids to work with, and they're not working together, both in the school and in the community. So the need that Bill described has actually increased because for young people to get those experiences, it's going to take all of us, and as you know, remembering when you were a child, or if you have a child, grandchild, nephew, or niece, different things turn kids on, excite them, inspire them, Jen's word, different ways at different times. It might be an arts project, it might be a welding project, it might be a community learning project, it might be a small group discussion, and a teacher and a principal are kind of hamstrung because they have a curriculum and as adventuresome as many of them are. They're limited unless other people come in and say, hey, can we help you? And then it probably takes something that teachers, and except for our principal here, are not prepared to do. They really have no preparation in their programs to learn how to use community resources or volunteers. Very little, and there's almost none. It's about how do you teach this concept, how to use this electronic medium, but it's not how can you tap people in the community to excite, motivate kids, show caring, and because of, and that's, I think, where No Child Left Behind really took us in a wrong direction. It really made schooling way too narrow, too rigid. It's sort of like nobody else can get involved, and I think many educators would love to have other people involved, but they aren't given help on how to do that, or an intermediary that would help them do that.
Yeah. And how do you think we can enact policies or larger scale efforts to get us closer to that vision of a more expansive sense of what learning and education and teaching could be? It's sort of a shared enterprise with communities working together with schools. And what do we need to get closer to that vision today?
Why don't you take the turn for that? Not me.
You're an expert.
I understand the question you're asking, how do we get into policy some of the ideas that we want? And one thing of great celebration, it only took 7 years. We got a couple paragraphs in recent legislation. Part of what my crazy friends and I did before we went into schools is we were in an old storefront. We drew up a 100-year plan because I kept telling people this didn't happen overnight. You aren't going to solve it overnight. And I was trying to lay out that vision. And so our goal, and it's miraculous because there's so many freaking failures and ups and downs in the 60s, it was like...
Is that a legal term, frickin'?
Frickin' frack.
There are established criteria.
They are, right. It's a policy. So, one of the things we aim for, and again, many deviations, going through horrendous times, was that we eventually wanted to get big enough so that we could prove that by bringing the resources to the schools, we could transform and keep kids in school and not drive. We finally got big enough where we were able to put the pressure, and then with ESEA, when it came in, we were able to get Lamar Alexander and Patty Murphy to be our champions and help put in, because the transformational thing we're doing, you could call it communities in schools, whatever you want to call it. But I can't emphasize enough that unless we change our delivery system, we're going to get the same results. Our reward system is to have us work separately. Like they had me in front of a committee and they said, are you in the partnerships? And I said, no. I said, partnerships are unnatural acts between non-consenting adults. Because he and I, we want to work together. Oh, and you come along as a funder and you say, boy, you guys are doing this. And I thought, you can't believe how great he is. And he's, oh, no, Bill's the really great one. Then you come back 6 months later and said, I have good news and bad news. We're going to fund you, but only one of you.
Right.
And so I say, he's really not as good as I said. I can outbid him. So funding separates us. And until you change the reward system, and one of the ways you do that, it was so simple. I couldn't get people in Washington to understand about what it meant to integrate, bring the services to the school. And I said, you got to have a person in the school to integrate. In order to have I get help from the music industry, and one of my friends in the music industry said, I don't understand why they don't understand you. He said, you can't. Oh, behave. Okay, this is really, there we go. He said, how can you have an orchestra if the violins are in one part of the town, the piccolos and the number of drums in another, and you don't have a conductor? In the 90s, I was asked by Cisco System, I was trying to get money out of them. They said, what makes you different? I said, our router. They said, no, we have the router. I said, yeah, you're going to change how we collect, organize, and disseminate information, but I can call Atlanta, Georgia, and introduce you to Cynthia that I met at 21 years old and convince the principal to let me train her not to be a counselor, but in triage. So that principal is freed up to be the principal, the teacher's the teacher, and you've got a conductor, you've got a router who knows which kids need a hug or mentoring or tutoring and which need intensive care because they're gangbanging or on drugs. So until we change how we deliver, so that in this legislation, we were able to get that any school in Title I in America can use their money to hire that router, that site coordinator. And now what we've done is we're creating an institute where we train people on what we've learned, whatever they call it. Because unless you have those routers in place to integrate the services, you're going to have nice programs, but you are not going to change the system.
I totally agree with Bill. That is, having a school site coordinator whose job is to connect the community, schools, and families is just absolutely central. And however it's funded, Title I, 21st Century Community Learning Centers, other, that is something, and that's something states could fund. It's not, you don't have to fund the whole program, fund the person, and just think of the payoff. You probably, let's say the salaries with fringes 60 grand, they'll probably bring in 120 grand worth of services. What a payoff. The second thing I think we need more of in the 21st Century Community Learning Centers, maybe the only big program where the applicant for the money has to be a school and community group. The community group can apply, but they have the school as a partner. It really changes the power structure. The tendency for educators to, because they've been beat up so much for so long, they said, I'm going to do my own thing, 8:30 to 3, because they're going to be held responsible. I mean, we can say whatever we want. They're going to be held responsible in sort of our accountability system we have now. So you have to create a counterbalance of how to apply. So if you're working on state legislation or you're working with your mayor, think of something that requires them to work together on the front end, not the back end, the front end. The third thing is, Bill alluded to, is the measures we have. We need to have measures of success for education. Should be some measures of, like, so, what percentage of your kids have volunteer working with you in school or after school? Just that simple. How many community groups do you have working with you in the school on the same plan? Not just working in the school, but working on the same plan. How many opportunities do your young people have, let's say middle school and high school in particular, per year to visit employers, a community college, a four-year college? That's another kind of partnership, but think of measures that we probably need to think about that force you to look outside. And then you have some reward system. If the only reward system is you have to raise your test score in reading, language arts, ELA, which most parents have no clue what ELA is, by 2 points. Now think about that. I have 6 grandchildren in school in 4 states, and so I have a PhD in statistics, so I get asked all these questions all the time. So what does that mean? My answer is, I have no clue. I'd have to look at the test. I would have to look at the test and see what it takes to get a 2-point gain, given where each child is. I mean, you're not going to get parent and community support. Now, you can say, we really want help with encouraging your child to read, do projects, write plays, things like that. So the school people need that, but we should almost have a corollary for some of these academic measures. What can you do in the community as a parent or community group to support reading and math? But also, as Jen said, what's interesting in the new research on after school and summers, parents really see that as a space for kids to be inspired to learn new things, to do something different. Now, if you're clever and have a good rapport with educators, they can take a good teacher can take anything, writing a play, collecting water in a sewer. They can turn any of those things into really dynamic lessons. So it doesn't mean you have to give up on more academic learning, but start with inspiration. The positive point, I'm going on too long, is the public is moving there. If you look at the Phi Delta Kappa poll, they do a poll every year in August with parents and public about what they want to see in education. 2 years ago, what was the main thing they wanted to see from public schools in America? This wasn't parents only, it was public hope. He's in the hope business.
I think we may be out of microphones that work. Let's see. Okay.
This one, I think I found one that works.
The second thing that poll showed, now just remember, a whole America, hope #1. #2 was engaged learning. Well, how could it be more engaged if school folks are working with community folks on real life projects in school, after school, summers? That is huge. I mean, way above everything else. And so I think we're at a real opportune time. And I think the poll that was done by, I can never pronounce the group out of New York, yeah, that's the one. Yeah, when they ask what the public thought about all the budget cuts proposed, 83% of the voting public said, do not cut after school. It's never been up there before, and I think it's because they want the safe environment, they want to have these inspirational opportunities. Now our job, your job, is not only to sell that, but you have to help your programs deliver inspirational opportunities. Some of our programs are far from that, and I think that would help the kids, but also help us long term.
Before you ask the next question, I want to build on something you said, but if nothing else, that word hope is the game changer. A few years ago, and I'm saying this because I got called Forrest Gump Jr. at times, but I got a call you come speak to the biannual meeting of the Attorney Generals. And I thought it was a joke. And in fact, a friend of mine, it was a man when I grew up with, who got turned around. I was talking to him the day I got asked, and he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to speak to the Attorney Generals." He said, "Are they going to all arrest you at once?" But the reason I was asked to present was because we'd gone through a 5 million 5-year longitudinal study. They knew we had the passion, but we added the professionalism to it. It showed we were the only scientifically proven program that not only kept kids in school, but graduated in one time. Then we had a return on investment study that was even tougher, where we showed that for every dollar they put into us over a 15-year period, we returned $11.60. That's what began to affect the legislature. So that's why I was asked to come address this friendly group. It's not warm and fuzzy. I had to do my professional thing, but just before I left, I said, "Look, it's an honor for a non-profit to get to speak to you all, and I'll never be asked back again. There'd be no reason, and plus I'm freaking old." So I said, "If you learn nothing else, I can save you millions and millions and millions of dollars. Hope's the game changer." And I said, I had no hope, and I hurt people. My friend Vinny had no hope and put a needle in his arm. Hope comes when somebody believes in you and walks through the valley of the shadow of adolescence with you and loves you into change. Somebody believed that I had something to give. I didn't believe it. I was done with life at 17, but had the persistent in my face loving me and give and say, "You do have abilities. You can organize, but we just would like you to do it in a more positive way." And so I feel blessed that I'm sitting here today because somebody gave me hope. So there is nothing stronger.
Wow. Well, I changed my question. I was going to ask in response to that.
Let me ask you a question.
So, this is not working. Now it is.
So the mix of passion and professionalism, I think, there are many of us in this room who are emerging leaders in this field and who have a lot to learn. And I'm wondering if there are other things like that that you've learned, and perhaps, even reflecting a little bit on some of the real struggles and challenges in your professional life that you've encountered, and some of the things that you've learned that would be most helpful for people who are just starting out in this whole policy arena and are making this sort of commitment to working in this field for a long time. What are some of the things the hard-fought lessons or the things that you've learned over the years?
You can't do it alone. Even though you have passion and hope, you're just one person. The key is to find people in your community and in the schools. I think we talk about school community partnerships being good for kids, but to move stuff, a policy, a program, get money out of your school boards, city, whatever. If you have community groups, parents, a couple principals, a couple teachers, and a business leader, that's tough to say no to over long term. So you have to kind of take your hope and excitement, and I tend to come across as being arrogant, and so I sometimes put it aside, not a lot, but I needed to be a good community organizer and let other people carry the load, find their passion, their interest, and get them involved and give them some ownership. That's really key. As you move up the chain, the same thing happens at the state level. There's probably some people working in state agencies, we've got a couple sitting here, who are all in your camp. There's some organizations at the state level that you may be competitors with, or they may not have even thought about after school, or communities in schools, or community in schools, and they might be allies. Community education in Alabama, they partner with after school all the time. Find those connections and see if you can get a common agenda and working together. But you're going to need somebody in the system, in the governor's office, in the legislature, in the Department of Ed, They can be high up, the higher up the better. But somewhere in there, because they can help you say, you know what? I like what you're doing. I can't get involved. I can't lobby. But by the way, remember that on September 15th every year, the state superintendent makes her pitch, his pitch to the legislature. So if you want to get your stuff in the budget, you better start working on it in April. She didn't tell you to do that. That's up to you. But you having people inside at the district school is important. Then you got to have, if you're inside, I've been inside and outside. You can't move a lot of things inside unless you're at the very top. But you need outside people to say, you know, we got this great idea. I can't tell you to lobby. However, the education committee is meeting Tuesday at 5 o'clock, and they're taking up this piece of legislation. Okay, if your partnership is good, they'll say, well, I'm a nonprofit, I can't lobby, but you can always educate. You don't have to, this lobbying is very narrow, it's on a narrow bill. You can educate, show people what you're doing. And then I think, Brent, you said, you know, the Ys and 4-H, often Boys and Girls Club, have a lobbying group. Their board can lobby as individuals. So they call up 5 of their board members who happen to know the chairman of the committee and says, hey, John, come on, I need some help here. So that's what a partnership does. You share ideas, you don't, and figure out who can do what. But it takes a lot of trust. He said, yeah. But that's kind of what your role is, I think, as leaders, is to figure out both how to do some interesting, innovative work in a way we talked about, but also how do you build partnerships and collaboration so you can maximize. California just got a big increase in their after-school appropriation after 5 tries, and they found out that a lot of their nonprofit partners, the school people couldn't lobby for an education appropriation, but a lot of their partners who are partners in the program have a lobbying wing. And so they all just hammered their legislature, and their Department of Ed, who's for it, couldn't lobby, but they could provide information. The principals could provide statistics. So think of all those dynamics.
What's the question?
So lessons learned, things to that would be sort of advice for new and emerging leaders in this field in policy particularly.
By the way, he hit it on the head there, and I just was at a conference 2 weeks ago that I was asked to observe, and it's a group that has a lot of resources, and we give $25,000 to help incubate grassroots organizations in cities across America. And I was particularly interested in being there. It was an honor to listen. One of the things I cautioned them about is that this is really great to build things from the bottom up. But you better tell them the truth of the ceiling they're going to hit. Beside my own inferiority complex about not having the credentials or that, I was considered, I'd earned my stripes building it from the bottom up, but you know, the people in power, if you didn't have the right credentials or you didn't say things just right, and I had to learn the hard way not to be bitter, because there was a certain ceiling you could get to and then you didn't get there. And I remember one time coming out of a meeting in Washington and thinking everything was right and finding out 2 hours later it wasn't when we were first building this. And I said, I'd rather have, when I was on the streets, a guy put a gun at my head and say, get your effing white self out of here. I understood the situation and had to deal with it. And down there I'd go in and they'd glad in you and tell you how everything's wonderful, and then I'd feel this stuff dripping down my back at lunch and they put a shiv in my back. And I said, I just want to be honest, you know. But what it's taught me, and I had to swallow it and deal with my own anger and hurt, and is I needed to listen. And it's hard to listen because we want to tell people what needs to be done, but to understand where they're coming from. And two, I was naive and thought, well, everybody's going to do what I'm talking about because they love kids. And they do love kids, but they got to find a way out to do it. You got to make a path for them. And I always ask people, and I used to think this was a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. I call it with them. What's in it for them? And I had this happen, the same thing when I did the Attorney General's thing. It was in Texas, and we were a line item in the Texas legislature, which is a riot. I mean, for 4 different folks because of the outcome. So I was asked to say something on the floor there, and we had our whole balcony full of young people with red shirts on, Communities in Schools Day at the Capitol. They were. So what was it? It was one of the top. The head of the legislature puts his arm on me as they're standing up applauding. He said, "See that guy over there? He hates kids, and he just voted to put this legislation through." And he said the reason is he has a small town. This is the only thing that's working, and he gets credit for it. And so. Yeah, I mean, that's an extreme. I'll give you another example. People say, well, communities and schools will never work, because how can you get everybody to work together around the school under this umbrella? And I happen to be a huge fan of Boys and Girls Clubs. So I went to my friend when we were starting this, who ended up being the greatest lobbyist I've ever seen for kids. And I said, Robbie, listen, I got this idea, and I'd like Boys and Girls Clubs to be the first partner. And he's telling me, I got so much on my hands as it is. I get, paid to build, and he built, one of the best Boys and Girls Clubs there. And I said, I think I can increase your attendance in the Boys and Girls Club. They said, hi, if you have one of your people come over to the school, we have lunch right at the school. We've won the right. We're in the schools. And you can know these kids all day long, and they don't miss a beat. They don't have to go find them after school. You have a continuum right into it. So I gave him something to help him be successful, which helps all kids be successful, but he's paid to build his own silo in the sense. So you have to find out what can people, it's not only what's in it for them, give them something that they can do that is easy for them to do. Anyhow.
Do you think there are more examples of opportunities to bring together the communities and schools work, and generally speaking, community schools with the after school and expanded learning movement? And what are some thoughts or ideas about how to do that? Because I think that's a really powerful example with one of the largest national youth service organizations. We're blinking again. So talk a little bit about that. Do we need it?
Yeah.
So you just switch.
They're
messing with you.
Both of those are on.
Both of them are on. Okay.
They need to rest.
They need to rest. There we go.
Well, Bill's actually doing something on that right
Okay.
now. Tell us about your effort with community schools.
Oh, yeah, we just were fortunate to get a demonstration grant that we're handling, but it's a 3-way partnership that the Zuckerberg Foundation gave money. And we've been trying to work on this, but we needed to have some funds. We'd already been doing a lot of work with Strive, and we were part of the Coalition for Community Schools. And in the collective impact world, what would happen if we got these 3 streams working together? And I used the illustration, I grew up in Pittsburgh, where 2 rivers came together with a third. And there wouldn't have been that industrial city if you didn't have the confluence of power that generated this great city. So if you have these 3 streams out here not working together, reward us. And boy, I am going to spend what years I have left with legislators, with foundations, corporations, fund us to work together. This is an example. One other quick example. I was doing a project for the Gates had asked some years back to create this model, which later started blended learning kinds of things. And I became good friends with the guy running it, and we were out having a couple beers, and I said, if you promise not to tell my board what I'm saying to you, because I have ways to get rid of you if you do. I want you to not fund us on the next round. I said, what? You've only had 1.5 beers. And I said, you at the time, he was starting to fund another colleague friend that I believed in, who had started New Leaders for New Schools,
Yeah.
to train the future principals, and he was also funding Teach for America. So I said, tell them they aren't getting their money either, but you're gonna put us in a room. Not money yet, I said, I eventually want it. But put us in a room and reward us to work together. Because here you have teachers that are excited, you have a principal that's trained, and you have the wraparound services. Why do we get funded to work in different parts of town? He said, well, I could do the conference, but I'm not going to my board with this. This is a little to him. But 4 years ago, and it's paying off with this crisis, beyond crisis in Clark County in Vegas, we were able to get through that. We are funded by the city, by the school system. Every school we go into now, it's not New Leaders, it's similar, it's a principal training thing. It just makes sense, but reward us to be in the same time, space, and relationship, and the confluence of that power brings the change. And I want to get to the place where there's legislation that says, we will fund you to work together when it makes sense to have the impact you can have there.
Get the incentive structure right.
Yeah, and I think, so many of you are part of state after-school networks on the board, or executive directors, or leads as we call them, or deputies. I think that's why it's so important to have on your leadership team at the state level all these different organizations. Now, you might take a different tact. I mean, let's say some states, let's say communities and schools and Boys and Girls Club get direct appropriations from the legislature. And maybe nothing for after school. So I think it'd be, unless one of them proposes it, it'd probably be a risky deal to say, oh, why don't you give up your money and we'll just put it in a big pot. That would be ideal, risky. But maybe think of some ways, maybe they could add a little dynamic to their appropriation and said, you would get more money, the grant site, if you work with 3 organizations. So analyze other places, I think it was Illinois, they had all these silos and they all got wiped out. So that was a force, and I think they then came together and realized, well, maybe if we all work together, we can find a way we can get a joint appropriation. So I think always be at the table with all the other groups, visit with them, visit their programs, talk to them. Don't just have them on your board. As important as that is, you actually have to get out and see how they operate and how they think, because there are little nuances in each group. That's why they're separate. And see if there's some commonality, and either work jointly parallel, which isn't perhaps preferable, but politically that sometimes is all you can do. Or think of ways you could create incentives to work across lines, or maybe pick a topic, I don't know, dropout prevention, and say, if we're all going to work on dropout prevention, to get that extra money, you got to work across these lines.
Well, I've got one more question, and then I want to open it up because I know our fellows will likely have questions for you. I was thinking last night as we were having dinner together that, Bill, you have played just a significant role as a founder of an organization and as a leader who started something and built, a nonprofit organization. And I know there are several folks in this room who are either first-time directors of a network or are in a network, might be in transition from one leader to the next. And so I wanted to ask you a question about reflections on the challenges of being a founder and the succession issue. And Terry's sort of the quintessential counselor, right? I mean, Terry's the right-hand person for Secretary Riley and has been for so many years, and I think many of us would love to have an opportunity to be in that kind of role. And so I wondered if you could reflect a little bit on what it takes to be successful in that trusted advisor, right-hand position. So each of you, sort of a different kind of reflection, but please share a little bit on that.
I have to think about mine.
You don't think I have to think?
No. You got it right off the top.
It's interesting. I just found out last week that Stanford reviews doing an article on succession, and we were chosen because of the succession that I went through with CIS. And what I learned about the founder, you never know where my head's going. So
That's why we wanted you to go first.
yeah, that's right. In the big picture thing, we just had our 40th anniversary. It was one of the greatest times. I have a hard time taking in good things, but I had to take it in. We had 90 of our alumni there that just blew the roof off the place. And I was asked to say a few words. I never say just a few words, but I say a few words. And I said, in the big scheme of things, founders, I call them frontier people. And frontier people have to be fearless and go out there and take on against the odds. And you just go at it. You're going to be persistent. You're going to be passionate. You're going to keep going. You go out there and and most of us, by far, I believe, I don't have a study on this, or ADD. You can always obviously tell I am. And we get that new village out there, we conquer the thing, and then we get bored within 15 minutes and we want to start another village, but we forgot to put the pipelines and we forgot to put the electricity in, etc. So at a time of the movement, particularly something that's growing from the bottom up, but any founder syndrome, you have to bring in a settler that can put in the systems that put that passion and the professionalism together. And if you do studies of movements that came out of the 60s, where are they today? The passion was there, the caring, the love, everything. But they couldn't make that transition because the ego is so strong. And the founder is the greatest asset and the greatest liability we get. The founders eat their own. They just because they can't believe somebody else can do it and even do things that you don't have. The thing I was blessed with, it was very painful, but two of the people I began to have heroes watching them that were older than me. One of them went out of drunk, another bitter and almost brought down the organization. And I said, God, don't let me go there. Don't let me, because, and I kept being reminded we had a 100-year plan and there's no way your ego is going to have you be 150. So you do have to transition at some point. But I almost crashed. I wasn't real good at knowing the difference between restricted and unrestricted. I said, hell, we got money in the bank. Yeah, but it's restricted. You know, so you didn't get this. And anyhow, it was not easy, but the person they picked to replace me happened to be in that way. We just have our third person in our history just start. But he was so grounded. And his ego was in check, but he very, very hungry. And you got to have somebody hungry to take on something that needs to get course corrected. Course correction. Go. And without Dan, everything that we built would have gone down. He's the one who put in the systems, taught me about the importance of data, and the two of us became friends, and then we were able at our 40th to have the third person come. And what I was able to say, we had the frontier person, and who came along was one of the most brilliant guys I ever worked with who ran our field operations. Then we did a search for the third, but he said we had the heart, the head, and now the person running this now has the hands. They're a craftsman, former state superintendent who came up out of the community and made it, and he just knows how to take us. And the three of us were just hugging at this thing, saying we've been blessed on that transition. But it is tough, but you have to have a vision much bigger and keep focused on the kids, and that's what you're about.
So I think most of what happened to me was luck. So I don't know how to explain that. But you got to show up all the time. That was part of it. So before I went to work for Riley, I was sort of noted as a rebel rouser, troublemaker, organizer. And I had to shake that image. I didn't do it intentionally. I did it for another reason. I realized, as I mentioned, that at some point I couldn't organize more than one place at a time, and I had to be able to learn how to do bigger things. And so I got a PhD and started teaching graduate school courses part-time. And that's then I became like, oh, he must know something before, when I actually knew something, working in schools and organizing.
I'm just a rabble rouser.
So that really helped so I think for some people getting an MBA, even if you're not in the MBA, PhD, isn't a bad idea. I don't always recommend it, but for me, I never would have got the job. In fact, Riley told me years ago, he said, I wanted to have my advisor, to be called my advisor, Dr. Peterson. And he said, he never said this, but I think he liked it, that I kind of was known as someone kind of shook things up. But I really tried to be friendly. And I think that's the other part about showing up all the time, is even though you disagree with someone, not to be disagreeable. So go to the principal's meeting, superintendent's meeting, chamber of commerce meeting. Even if you don't kind of fit in, there's probably somebody there might ask you to come with them, and just be around, be all the time. And then I had the good fortune of the state years ago was trying to do the school finance system. This is a long time ago. None of you were born here except Bill and I. And I knew nothing about school finance policy. I'm good at numbers, so I learned it. I went to the meetings. So then I was hanging out with the chairman of the House and Senate Education Committee. They didn't know stuff either. And experts came in. When you're working on something together and you're give and take and you're friendly and this part, if you're not into partying, I wouldn't recommend this. I don't want to create bad habits. But I hung out a lot at night in a lot of places at the capital city with legislators and their staff. I don't think you should have to do that, but if you're inclined, go for it. That's when you meet people of the opposite party philosophy, and that's when you find out, hey, I'm rough, tough guy, rural area, Republican, who absolutely loves music. Whoa! Now art's in the school. I mean, you just don't know what's going to happen. So show up all the time, be friendly, present a nice argument, but don't beat it to death. So Bill, you'll love this because you confirm it. So once they sign on here to be a White-Riley-Peterson fellow, it's not a 1-week seminar. It's a 30, 40, 50-year commitment. Is that about right?
Praise be.
That's it. So, be urgent, but don't, a lot of times I know I used to be just a pain in the butt, and I got over that somehow. I don't know what, Riley taught me that. He looks laid back, as a gentleman. Behind them is just a fury, like, why don't we do that tomorrow? Or why don't we do it yesterday? He never says that. You never know that. But you kind of get like, wow, we could do something. And so I would, particularly with the networks, you gotta have almost an open card to be involved in all these groups. Show up, you're gonna do stuff. It's crazy, it's not worth your time, short run. Long run, but you find all these relationships and the little nuances that make people realize that they're interested in something you're interested in. It's rare you can't find someone who's got a good heart and want to do something right. Even if they hate kids, your project's the only one that works. So that's what now this is really inside baseball. So once you get in those circles, You absolutely, absolutely, absolutely don't tell anyone anything negative or positive. You're in that circle, you don't tell any stories, maybe 10, 20 years later, and you're done. You cannot portray anything. Family, nothing. That's a kiss of death. Everybody likes to go in and tell a story. Well, we had a meeting yesterday, and forget it. Eventually you'll be washed out, and nobody will trust you. The only way to get trust is absolutely have to say what you think. Go with the flow. If it totally is against your morals, then get out. But if you're in there and basically halfway happy and think you're making a difference, you absolutely cannot tell stories anywhere, including your family. I told my wife, because she's in government, she has the same circle, she knows, but she'd be the only one that knew. And I didn't tell her everything.
You know what's fun about this? If he forgets, I was lobbying him at one time. I found out he liked a certain beer.
All right, so we have time for a couple of questions, but first let me say thank you, and please join me in thanking Terry and Gail for the Okay, questions?
A question.
Yes.
Bill, you mentioned the power of hope quite a bit. I wanted to know if you found any success in instilling hope in the families of the young people.
Did everybody hear? Your question was instilling hope in the kids, but what about the family? I learned on the streets a really important lesson that the quickest way to the family is the kid beginning to make it. Then I got invited in, not as some professional, I got invited in as a friend, because their kid began to have hope. They began to turn their lives around. Then I got invited to break bread with the family, and that gave them hope, and then build a bridge so that I earned the right to be heard by the family, not out of professionalism, but out of personal relationship.
So it's not easy to categorize, but some families have so much stress and so much pain and anger, and justifiably so. That's the one. For the next notch up or sideways or whatever, most parents really care about their kids. They don't know how to negotiate the system. So this summer program that my wife has put together, STEAM summer camps in one of our most rural, high poverty schools in South Carolina and maybe in America. At the end of there's a 6-week summer camp, but at the end of each week, the kids put on a little demonstration of what they learned. So they do, if the topic is force and motion, Yolanda has seen it. It blew us away that they could be so successful. Force and motion is the topic for the week, but they teach it through 4 art forms. So at the end of the week, the hour-and-a-half dance they have each week is about designing a dance around force and motion. And then on Friday, they show it. Same with drama, same with visual arts. And parents, grandparents, aunt and uncles show up. And a lot of them never seen their kid being praised or in a school for something positive, and that's just a small thing. You've got to do far more than that. But also, and having kids help do things. Like there's a rural school in South Carolina, a 21st Century grant, and they had trouble getting parents to come to anything. And the 21st Century middle school kids, with their teachers and community partners, put on an Italian dinner. Everything. Design the menus, design the advertisements, and they had like 5 times more parents than they ever had at a PTA meeting. But the kids ran the show. I think that's not enough, but it's sort of a clue that giving kids and showing them respect is sort of showing the family respect. Now, as I said, other parents have been through so much, I'm not sure they're going to participate unless you go right into the home and they can trust you. And a lot of parents don't have much reason to trust anyone.
About a couple years ago, Gallup came out with a study saying that the American work week is now 47 hours, and if you're salary employed, it's 50 hours, with many of those working second jobs. I mean, there's some obvious, but just from your perspective, I'd like to know what impact you think those statistics are going to have on the American family and the need for hope.
The further edge, a lot of the hours aren't contiguous. So, in a lot of states, including South Carolina, Alabama, people live in a rural community, commute an hour and a half, 2 hours to a job, and then they have to lay out for a couple hours before they work again. I mean, they're going 15 hours. So that makes, that's crazy. Anyhow, so that makes after school and summer program just critical, because what are the kids going to do? Where can they go? Where can they be safe? Where can they get some additional help? So the note comes home from the teacher said, well, ask your parent to help with the reading. Well, they get home at 9 at night. They left at 5 in the morning. So I think after school is really a key player, and we should watch the hours to match those unusual circumstances where possible. Then from a pure financing, I know the United Way nationwide, and in some states has used the data, it didn't come from them. They looked at the cost of living for a family, the cost of housing. I don't know if you've seen this, it's really worth looking at for your state. Housing, transportation, medical. In almost every state, if you had 2 children, one school age and one preschool, the highest cost of living was $9,000 for childcare. $9,000. Now, most of our after-school programs are underfunded. For about $1,500, if you're not in the urban area, you can run a halfway decent after-school program, because it's the partnership. Think about how that helps a family. If you just cut their costs, somebody who's making $25,000, you just cut their costs by $5,000. Hello. So I think that's part of it. It's not all of it, but I think, and then that after school, community and schools, maybe can help the educators find, school day people find new ways to work with the families, given if you're working this outlandish hours and you want to have parent conferences, maybe you got to figure something different. And maybe sometimes the after-school communities and school people have connection with parents that they could say, I can't ever be at a, family night because I'm not ever here. But maybe together you can work through. That's just a little tip of the iceberg. Probably Bill has more.
Go ahead. I'm done.
Yeah, there's 2 parallel things going on at the same time, and both are big concerns because we're so bubbleized in our own tribes that make all these things so much more difficult to solve. So you have that with the 50-55, but the real issue for the future is no jobs and no hours. And what do we do to sustain families that can't be part of the robotic world or the more technologically driven world? And I think these 2 go together, and that's why we got to break down the bubbles and see community in a whole new way. We've done one small piece of it by integrating around the schools, but how do you rebuild communities where the surrogate aunts and uncles are there? Because that was another thing. It was during the Reagan years, they had Bill Milliken invited to speak, and it was on family, and I got in and I had never seen so many white people, and they were all worried about family, and I got up there and said, I don't think the breakdown of the nuclear family or the stress on the nuclear family is the issue. I said it's the breakdown of the extended family that was the support system. So how do we create the aunts and uncles and that larger community to surround and not put an added pressure on, and see ourselves as that orchestra working together for our brothers and sisters who are in a different situation.
So, thinking of that, sometimes think of the programming in your site. I've seen fabulous older African women doing knitting circles. A lot of groups have a tradition of something, making something, and you know, people who might not say, "Oh, I'm too old to go in and tutor them in reading," but you know, there's a project in Appalachia with a 21st Century program where I think they're mainly older white guys who are into mountain music. They tromp into the middle school and say, we want to teach the kids mountain music.
And people said,
You know, yeah, sure, that's going to work. Well, they regrouped, they talked to some of the kids outside the school, and they said, we'd like to build some of those cool instruments. The mountain music group became building instruments, and then the older folks and the kids start composing songs. Then they start performing together, but also in the community. So I think art and music is sometimes a really good way to get other people involved. You've heard about the new jazz initiative that we're promoting in after-school programs that are interested. The Lincoln Center, I was on a call with them, and they did a jazz initiative after school. And somebody said, that sounds like swing music. So they had a swing music dance party, 3 generations at the school out of the jazz initiative. That's right. So people, older people see that what's going on is so complicated. So you got to find a foothold to get them in. And then it's the hope and the relationship they can provide, and they can read too, but it's more the hope and relationship.
Well, please join me in thanking Bill and Terry again.